Hi, I'm Deke Antrim, and this is SideTrack'd, a podcast for movie lovers. On this episode, we have a 3-part deep dive into 2004's hilarious horror comedy, SHAUN of the Dead, written and directed by Edgar Wright. First, we sit down with Steadicam Operator Paul Edwards, who gives us the inside scoop on how he teamed with Wright to construct the amazing shots you see throughout the film. Then our good friend Rosa Martins stops by for a post-SHAUN of the Dead screening discussion in which we basically just drool over our love for the movie. Then we chat with co-composer Dan Mudford, who worked hand-in-hand with the director to formulate the iconic score you hear Shaun and his mates take on the undead to. As always, we speak our minds here on SideTrack'd, and there are major spoilers ahead. You have been warned.
When the dead walk the earth.
Any zombies out there?
And evil is everywhere. One man holds the future in his hands.
Here they come!
Look out!
Are you alright?
Shaun of the Dead.
Oh, thank God for that.
I'm honored to be speaking with Steadicam extraordinaire Paul Edwards. How you doing today, Paul?
I'm very good. Thank you. Yeah, it's nice to be called extraordinaire. That doesn't happen very often.
And we're off. Before we dive into some of your more iconic shots from SHAUN of the Dead, I wanted to ask you what inspired you to become a Steadicam operator?
Well, before I got into kind of the film and TV world, I was actually an engineer. I did my degree in engineering, mechanical engineering. So I had all that kind of background of interest in gizmos and gadgets and mechanical things. So that was always kind of bubbling around in the background. And it was actually Ted Churchill came across to do the first Steadicam course in the UK at the place called Optex in London. And a bunch of people were invited just at the end when he was due to fly back. He'd finished the course. He was very kind and did a sort of little mini lecture for interested people. And I turned up as one of those people. And I was just completely fascinated. I mean, he's a great kind of showman. And so it was terrific to see some of the shots he'd done and have a bit of access to this very glamorous film world, something which I hadn't gone anywhere near other than watching films. So yeah, that was sort of the inspiration. And he had the rig there and he did a demo and we were all sort of looking at this thinking, this is amazing. How does this work? So that was the start of it. And then it was maybe 3 years after that I actually had the chance to go on a course. And I only really did it as an education because I'm not the biggest of guys. And so I thought you have to be 6 foot wide, 6.5 feet tall, bandana, the full work to be able to do Steadicam. So I thought I was going to do it. I was going to struggle. But at least as an education, I would know about Steadicam when anybody wanted to, spec it for use. So I would be the guy that could talk some sense to. But the course was a week-long course, much like the courses that I run now. By sort of day 3, I remember we were doing, maybe even day 4, we were doing little sort of practice shots. And at the end of the day, everything was taped onto at that point, it was little 8mm videotapes. And we'd sit sort of towards the end of the day and just go through and see what everybody had been doing. One of the shots, then the instructor said, who did this? And I sort of leant over everybody's shoulders and think, I think that's mine. And I remember it was a low mode shot down a corridor. I remember it, up some stairs, down a corridor. It wasn't brilliant, but obviously he sort of said, somebody here is starting to get this. So I did the course and then it was a while longer and when I decided to sort of jump into it. But so inspiration of this sort of man and machine mix, I suppose. Inspiration and as well from, the sort of course guy. It was a guy called Andy Shuttleworth who was in the UK, but not long after went to the States to work. So he was very keen and full of life and very inspirational.
You were shooting SHAUN of the Dead in between working on Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. What do you see as the major differences between big budget and smaller budget films?
I did quite a lot of the Harry Potters. A lot of the time there is no difference. You do find that people who don't have the opportunity to work on, this sort of stupid budget films, they have certain assumptions. And one of them is that it must be nice to have all those resources and all that time. And that's kind of all the resources, maybe. But the time, that's the one thing I still find. I still work on various things with different budgets. And there's always the same kind of pressure of time because you are spending on a big budget, you're spending so much every hour. And that pressure is on everybody to, the first to keep things going and the production to schedule things. Everybody's under the same kind of time pressure. So really, in a lot of ways, there isn't a huge difference between them. You just get kind of to play with bigger toys, and you have the opportunities to work with some incredible actors. So that's a real privilege. In terms of your day and your attitude to what you're doing, it should really be the same. It shouldn't really be different. A lot of the early years I spent bouncing around a lot of different projects, bits of corporate things where there was very, very little money. And then I could maybe at the end of the week do some Harry Potter days, and then back to some TV stuff, which you're expected to shoot a lot more pages. But in general, I always felt, and I always had and still do have the attitude that you're kind of the same person. I mean, some of the DPs I work with, I'm impressed with their attitude to life, and they will spend just as much time talking to a trainee and being interested in their life than they would somebody that is a world-renowned focus puller who they've worked with for maybe 20 films. I admire that and aspire to that kind of attitude, really.
Your first day on Shaun of the Dead was the famous trip to the shop. Before we dive into the shop more, talk to me about walking on set as a day player and not knowing Edgar Wright or the director of photography, David Dunlap, beforehand.
At that time, that was pretty much my life. Half the time was walking onto sets, which, as you say, you don't really know anybody. By that point, I was bumping into the same people in terms of camera department. So you maybe know the focus puller, recognize the trainee, maybe know the loader on B camera, it was that kind of thing. But as you say, the people who you have to interact with well and efficiently, director, DP, and to some extent, the actors as well. Yeah, going in cold. It's not a nice kind of position to be in. And I remember that sort of time because nearly 20 years ago, those kind of years, I do remember the feeling of getting the call sheet the day before and going through and trying to pick out names that you knew. Because that was I guess if you had one or two, it's like you knew the gaffer or maybe some people on the electrical team or the sound department. It made a real difference because you felt you could turn up without completely cold, just who's who. That's the thing. I mean, you're learning names as well. You've got 20 names to learn. That's not my strength, particularly as well. I was really bad at that. I blame the fact that I used to bounce around lots, so the names were changing almost day to day, but that's not really fair. It's actually that I'm just very, very bad at it. But yeah, you have to get up to speed quickly. They're doing half the work because they don't know you and they're trying to communicate quickly and efficiently as much as they can. Edgar particularly, obviously this was a big, big shot for the film. And very brave move to have so much riding on. It just had to work because if your first day of the film and it doesn't go well and you've just blown a day of your budget, it wasn't a very big budget.
And it was one of the first shots of the production, right?
It was the first shot. I remember setting up with a little Steadicam stand outside that little white gate that Simon Pegg comes out of. Yeah, we did the zombie shot first. So it was the following day to the shops shot first. I think because they worked out that it was easier to do the complicated stuff and then go backwards than it was to start with everybody non-zombie and then zombify them.
How much of a reset was that? Like you said, you shot the post-zombie apocalypse shot first, and then you guys reset and did the clean version. Yeah,
from one to the other. Do you know what? I can't really remember. I dove back into my diary, and strangely, I actually have some notes on that. That was May the 11th, 2003.
Wow.
It says Mother's Day in the USA and Australia. It was what we call continuous day. So 8:30 start, which meant we should have shot continuous 10 hours, so no break, through to 6:30. I can't remember ever waiting around. Edgar knows exactly what he wants. He was very specific. I remember being very sort of intense, not in a bad way, but I think he had this in his head and he knew he had to get it into my legs for my timing, so he could see it on the screen. We sort of built the shot up slowly. I can't remember how many takes. I think we did a lot of takes. I can't remember how many, and I didn't make any notes for that. We get halfway through and maybe have to stop. But the actual break between the zombie and the non-zombie shot, there can't have been much time. I think we must have started rehearsing almost straight away the non-zombie shot and talking through all the little notes to remember that when we're following him, remember there we had the zombie on the floor. So particularly looking deep as we're parallel to Simon, looking deep into the sort of little front garden, seeing the front doors. We need to be able to see that pathway at this point because Edgar was saying, remember, we got a zombie there. So we need to show previous day that's clear, and basically picking out various points during the shot to remind me that these are sort of key points that we will have hit already on this zombie shot. It was just non-stop. I think it was just a non-stop day for Steadicam.
Talk to me about that because, Edgar is notorious for timing sequences to a rhythm. This particular shot needed to be in sync with every element seen on camera. Can you expand on some of the challenges that brought up?
Simon Pegg was really good with this. Now, I didn't really realize until later how in tune he was with the camera. I think it's fair to say he probably likes Steadicam because he's very aware of the camera there, and he can just feel when you have to slow down and rotate a bit to bring something in the background. It just felt like he was completely in tune. He could feel when I was doing that, and all his timing was helping to drive me. We were trying to open up the street so that we start close on the gate, and then I see his hand comes in, and we pull back, and we had the football, the kid with the football hitting him in the face, which took a few takes as well. We had to stop there a few times, I remember. And then pivoting around. Yeah, it was key points. It was trying to get a little bit profiled so we could see up that huge, long perspective of the street and see our man in the car. It was really just a kind of flowing thing. We sort of had a go, and it became, as soon as the people had kind of been placed, it was obvious how I had to kind of keep pivoting around Simon to get things in at various points. We crossed the road. It was a difficult timing with the car coming, but obviously I had to be looking down the road when that happened, but not too early because obviously you see it starting off, waiting to come to its stop. And then I was sort of behind Simon quite a bit. So it was quite a race to get past the car where the guy was washing the car one day. Because at that point I have to be parallel to him to see into the house that's just to the side of him. And then we have somebody running through. I think the challenge was, it was fairly clear where you had to get, but it was just getting between them quite smoothly and not making it look like the camera was having to rush to get from A to B. It had to look fairly natural. We were on the journey with Simon getting to the shop. You have to be careful that it didn't feel like the camera sort of got too separated from him, because then you become aware that it was a camera and not just you following him to the shop.
Right.
You got sort of 80% there fairly quickly. And then it was just all the sort of trimmings of trying to maximize. So just pivoting around a little bit more in front of him so we could see a bit more deep background, get a couple more zombies in, and then hanging on to that frame as long as you can, knowing that in about 3 or 4 seconds time, you need to be, instead of in front, you need to be parallel. So it was just smooth transitions really was the key to it, I think.
We don't need to get into any gossip, but were you aware there was ongoing differences of opinion between Dunlap and Wright before arriving? And did any of that affect the production and how it went that day?
That day, no, there was no, I think I was concentrating so much because it was a big day for the film. It was a big day for me as well, because I turn up and then it's like, what's the Steadicam shot? Well, this is the Steadicam shot, followed by all the coverage on Steadicam, followed by another Steadicam shot that's not quite as long, and that's the day. I was concentrating on getting through the day, to be honest.
Gotcha.
In fact, in my little notes in the diary, I put in Day of Hell. Day of Hell with Arri LT and a 24mm. That was my one-line summary. So I think I was pretty shattered by the end of the day.
Wow.
So I wasn't really aware of, any who was getting on with whom or who wasn't, or any conversations that had been taken part. I was just absorbing as much as I could. I was listening to Edgar, I was listening to David for, like the lights in the fridge and all this kind of thing. And do you see that cable? And, those kind of little technicalities.
Gotcha. Just staying focused.
Yeah, just get the job. Don't mess it up.
Yeah.
Don't mess it up. I did feel a lot of pressure.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't particularly a sort of lightweight build either. So, you were glad for a bit of a reset. A couple of minutes to get your legs to rest.
Yeah. Later on in the movie, you have a shot that leads Shaun through the house to kill Philip. Right before the whip pan, Barbara says, "No fighting, you two," which is a line that personally makes me shake with laughter every single time. Was there ever any time during the production you found the gag so funny it became distracting?
No. I was very aware of the humor. I mean, I try not to do it because I'm always aware of if the actor picks up on it, but I found myself smiling. So I was smiling inside, and that made me smile outside because just to appreciate the kind of, especially, Simon Pegg is such a natural comedian. Mm-hmm. It just seems to be so effortless, but it's not. It's like that smile of admiration. I remember that because he's obviously enjoying so much what he's doing, and he's very, very good at it. It's just really nice to be in that kind of company with somebody who just does their job so well and makes it look so easy. But yeah, the laugh out loud moments, even consequently, that I found really funny when you're shooting. And it's only really with comedy. I never really get the comedy as well when I'm sort of there present.
Mm-hmm.
probably because, I'm just sort of concentrating and thinking, oh yeah, that's really funny. And it's not till you see the film or whatever, you realize it's really funny. It's different with emotional scenes. I really feel emotional scenes when I'm shooting them. I just think, oh God, I'm near to tears here. I don't know how they do this. It's just amazing. That connects with me. But with comedy, not so much. It's only really afterwards that I suppose I can relax and I don't quite get drawn into the comedy.
Right. Let's move on to the Rescue Liz sequence. You said this was your favorite day of shooting. Besides the obvious fun of watching Shaun comedically bash in the undead's faces, why do you have such great memories of that day?
It was a beautiful, hot, sunny day. I remember that to start with. And we were all in quite a kind of relaxed mood. We came onto this housing estate and we had sort of a big chunk of it under our control. So it was kind of a good start to the day. For a Steadicam op, it's always good when you get stuff to do which isn't going to be chopped up and edited, because you feel that you're creating a sort of a linear piece of the film which is actually going to be used. So that's always really nice. So it was actually a tough one because, he was running away from me.
It's an amazing shot, Paul. You start inside of the car. You're panning back and forth between the front and back seat, and then Shaun exits through the sunroof. And then as the Jaguar speeds off, the shot continues through the yard, and then Shaun's racking up zombie points, and then you land on an extreme close-up of the keypad. It's fantastic.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm just glad it works. We had a bit of a struggle. I had a bit of a struggle because we didn't want to slow it down because he's got all this energy. This is the sort of, right, I'm going. So he launches himself away from the car, having to get through all the zombies. And there was a certain natural pace which Simon went at, and it was uphill as well. So that wasn't good for me. So by the end, I think it was the final hit, the final zombie, because I don't think any of these guys were professionals. I think I'm right in saying that. They were all, fans of the show and friends of Simon or Edgar, or it's a real mix of people. But they were pretty damn good. But the last guy, which was a really nice hit, Simon hits him with a cricket bat. He spins round. But unfortunately, the guy spins in shot, but drops right in front of me. So I have to get over him. And
that's right before you do your extreme close-up, though, right?
Yeah. So I'm here in front of this guy, and this extreme close-up is about 20 feet away. There's no way I can get there, really. I did the old Garrett Brown trick of not asking somebody to do something, not asking Simon to slow down, but just saying what my problem was, which is, this hit looks terrific, and he spins right in front of camera. But I'm being really slow because I'm having to be really, really careful to kind of step over wherever he ends up. And I'm sort of losing you a bit there. And then Simon says, oh, don't worry, you notice. But on that bit when he does the hit, he takes a moment. He turns around, looks towards camera, which all actors obviously love to do. He looks back to camera, but it's like a moment of assessment. It's like, well, okay, I've got through these guys, and now it's the door. But that sort of, second or so, because I don't stop at all. I just keep going. And it just gives me that little bit of time to get closer to him. So when he turns back and goes to the door, I managed to get to the door bells just before I need to,
Fantastic information. I love hearing that. And so let's talk about the reverse shot. The timing on that was so exacting. You're leading them back to the Jaguar, and the second you frame up the hero shot of all four characters, you whip pan to the car. It's just fantastic. Can you talk to me about that a little bit? In
some ways, that was harder than going in. It wasn't as quick because basically the group couldn't move as fast as he was moving forward. But yeah, it was the same problem of trying to, this is the great thing about Steadicam. You have such good peripheral vision. So we'd lined up the zombies and Simon came forward with the bat. And obviously the trick was want to bring any zombie in too early because there's a dead space. So I had to bring them in just at the last second for each one so that as the bat hit, their face was in shot. So again, it was just kind of having key points which you have to hit. And it was all really about timing and just feeding in each hit as it happened. And then I'm not sure if I think we had them all marked for the end. So I think they were landing on marks and I had a mark as well to hit. So I was really pleased actually with the end framing, that sort of heroic framing is really nice. Because I'm down the hill a little bit, it's like the grassy knoll. I'm down a bit lower, so they've got that heroic look. I'm looking up at them. And then the whip pan is a trick shot, so that's whip off and then whip on, and it's edited together onto the car. Not even sure I did the whip on. That might have been a tripod, actually.
Interesting.
Yeah, but the end of that shot was the whip off. Let the beat to let them see the car, and then whip off as fast as I can. And I remember, actually, I didn't have the gimbal on the Steadicam post quite tight enough, so the first time I whipped, the gimbal whipped and the rest of the camera stayed where it was because the gimbal to post connection wasn't quite tight enough.
Your last day of shooting was the shot where you lead the group through the backyards to a chance meeting with the Yvonne of the Dead group. It starts with a wide shot to include all the characters and their personality traits, then gradually squeezes the frame to focus on Sean and Liz directly into the jump scare. Jump scares don't play as well in wide shots. Did Wright already have those nuances on the page before you arrived, or was that worked out during the walkthroughs?
That was all worked out beforehand. Yeah, we want to see all the group, we establish them, and then it kind of closes down into the Sean and Liz dialogue. The trickiest bit, well, not falling over the weeds and everything else in the way along the path, but apart from that, the trickiest bit was at the end. Simon was so good at this. It's his step forward which helps bring me onto the group, the sort of mirror image group. That's what gives the camera energy. So he's with Liz most of the time, and then I can't remember the last bit of dialogue, but then after it's over and we now want to see the other mirror group, Simon does quite a big step forward relative to Liz, and I kind of go with him and slow down a bit, and the whole frame pivots and landing into shot of this huge long group. That was the trickiest to line up and get right. And obviously it was all dialogue based, so I had to sort of keep my ears open. It was nice because we were fairly wide lens wise, so I was fairly close. I could hear everything that was going on and hear all the sort of nuances of timing. But yeah, everything I think that I did with Shaun of the Dead was in Edgar's head.
Wow.
As images almost. He knew exactly what he was doing. I think he'd been planning it for ages and ages and ages and knew he just had to get it down on film. That was the last challenge. I think everything else had been done. He knew he had the actors and the script had all been honed down. So it was just this last bit, the last essential bit. He's very on top of everything.
Fantastic. Have you seen Shaun of the Dead with an audience?
Yeah, I've seen it with an audience. And that was quite amazing because it had a pretty good buzz when I went to see it. Sort of come and people were talking about it. That's when I saw it in the cinema. I've got an idea that I had seen it at a cast and crew before that. And it was great to hear the response. You just feel that the whole room is enjoying it.
Yeah, what was the audience reaction?
It was great. It's so funny. Not so much the laugh out loud bits that I like the most. It's the subtle nuances that the characters do.
Oh, for sure.
And the little pauses of exasperation and when shoulders drop just before they say something. It's those like nuances just make it so real.
Yeah.
You know, I love those things. I love
for sure. You've gone on to work on the majority of the Harry Potter movies. You've shot movies for Danny Boyle, Ridley Scott, a bunch of Guy Ritchie movies. Looking back on this small budget movie, what does Shaun of the Dead mean to you in your career?
Well, it's quite funny because out of all the shoots I've done, my involvement really was quite, minor. I wasn't in it for the whole sort of 9 or 10 weeks, whatever the shooting schedule was. I wasn't living it in that way. At the point I did it, it was really nice to do long Steadicam shots, the cricket back scene and, to the shops and back scene. Those kind of things stuck out for quite a while. And it wasn't really until Shaun of the Dead became such a cult thing and people sort of tapped me on the shoulder and, say, somebody said, you worked on Shaun of the Dead, the Steadicam. Did you do that? Yeah. Wow. What was it like? And you think, wow, yeah. Well, it was just in amongst all the rest of the things I was doing then. So it wasn't really like a career break thing. It sort of grew afterwards. But it's great to have done it. I imagine sometimes what would it have been like to have worked on, 2001 or done some days on Lawrence of Arabia, those kind of things. And I think this is probably as close as I'm ever going to get to it because it's so iconic. I mean, and people love it. It's great that people love it.
I love that you just compared Lawrence of Arabia and Shaun of the Dead. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I think there's a desert drama / zombie film to be made. Yeah, the crossover. Romantic comedy in the desert with zombies. But anything that becomes iconic, it's lovely that whatever way you were involved in it, you were sort of there. It's quite nice.
Are there any Steadicam ops out there that you look up to? Any particular shots that amaze you?
In a way, I look up to anybody who sticks a Steadicam on. It's a crazy profession. Well, anybody who does Steadicam and makes it look easy, which the good guys do, I think that's to be admired because everybody assumes that they know what's going on within somebody's head and through somebody's body when they're doing Steadicam. You do Steadicam, it's a different thing when you're doing it. It looks so much easier and sleeker and effortless when you're looking from the outside. But in terms of names, I suppose Larry McConkey is the one op who kind of just wows with his shots that he's done, really iconic shots like Bonfire of the Vanities and Brian De Palma films, Untouchables.
Goodfellas and all that.
Yeah, and if you want to find the really unusual, impressive shots, it's usually Larry who's sort of been involved with them. He's such a character. I've only met him once. He was doing the Hugo Cabret film, the Scorsese film in Shepperton Studios in London. And that was being shot 3D. It was a Cameron Pace 3D rig. We were going to use it on our next film, big sort of epic, and it was going to be 3D. So it was my job to do the Steadicam. And so I went in to sort of have a chat with him because that sort of rig, as in not Steadicam rig, but the 3D rig that he was using was going to be rebuilt for us to use on our film. So I got to have a chat with Larry and his rig. It was just full of little brackets and just so Larry. It was very, very sort of geeky and little things that were fixed, and he's very into his technical stuff.
You've got the new Doctor Strange movie coming out. Any other projects that you can talk about?
Yeah, Doctor Strange is May, I think, which we shot through, well, it was supposed to start in March 2020, and then it got pushed because of COVID. It was a big break. We eventually started it like 6 months later, and that was my first COVID movie.
Oh, wow.
Horrible, really. It was good. They were taking everything very seriously, and they built a huge set on the back lot, and it was quite cold, and we had masks, we had shields all the time. That was the protocol, and you just couldn't see anything. That was the problem. Everything was steaming up, but I'm really looking forward to seeing it.
And do you have any other projects you can talk about?
Coming up, I've just finished an unusual film for Netflix called Enola Holmes. Well, it's the second Enola Holmes film. We did the first one, which was my last movie before COVID arrived, so end of 2019. Quite unusual in that it's mostly shot on Steadicam. Every day is a kind of 10-hour Steadicam day.
Oh, man.
And almost every shot is Steadicam, all the Steadicam shots, all the coverage. And the idea is to get everything moving so that the camera always has this feeling that it's moving all the time. So we did that in 2019, and it did really well. And they decided that we're going to do a second one. So we shot that end of last year, 2021. So sort of 10 weeks flat out. Coming up, who knows? I mean, there's a couple of things which I might be doing. I'm having a bit of a break now after that Enola Holmes extravaganza. It's good to take a few weeks off and recover.
Right.
And, pay some attention to the kit and everything.
Nice.
But yeah, I quite like the idea that I never quite pin anything down too much, because it's still quite exciting when the phone rings and somebody says, hey, how about, or such and such is doing this. Would you be interested? And it's quite exciting.
Sam Raimi wants you to come shoot the Doctor Strange movie. Yeah, sure. I'll be there.
Yeah. He was such a sweet guy. Couldn't believe. He's so funny. His dry sense of humor. I mean, I'm usually quite good on dry sense of humor, but he caught me out completely. I really thought I'd upset him, and it took me a while to work out, oh, wow, he's taking the piss. He's fine.
That's great.
I mean, I couldn't say, enough about what a lovely guy he was.
Is he still wearing the suits and ties at the set?
No. Must have given that up.
Oh, wow.
No.
That was his famous trademark, is showing up with a tie and dressing really nice for all his shoots.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, lots of jeans and things. So, yeah, he must have given that up.
I guess we're getting the second iteration of Sam Raimi now. That's fantastic to hear.
Yeah.
Did you have anything else that I didn't cover that you wanted to mention?
Yeah, it was so nice to be involved. And I've seen Simon Pegg sort of on odd occasions on projects since then. And he always remembers me. I mean, some actors you've worked with, and they kind of look at you quizzically, do I know you? I mean, I'm sure he kind of doesn't remember my name maybe or whatever and asks some way, but he's always lovely. He comes up to me and says, hey, Paul, how are you doing? And he'll introduce me to, other cast members. Oh, this is Paul. He did Steadicam on Shaun of the Dead. It's really nice, isn't it, that he looks back and sees how important Shaun of the Dead was to everybody and wants to kind of remember it and, include you in it, I suppose.
Yeah.
It's really nice.
I love that.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you so much for your time, Paul. Continued success with your career. I look forward to seeing your future work.
Thank you.
Thank you for being such an important part of something so special to me. I really appreciate it. Cheers.
No problem at all. Thanks very much for having me.
And now for my conversation with Rosa Martins. The last time we talked was when we reviewed the John Wick trilogy.
Yes, sir. Hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
Since Keanu has not made a movie since then, I guess we're going to go ahead and review a different movie.
Okay. Yep, we'll let that one go.
Yeah, I'm just kidding. I shouldn't start off fights. Did you see in the news the other day that he donated 70% of his makings to leukemia research?
Yeah, that's not strange for him. His sister actually had leukemia.
Oh, okay.
She stayed with him during treatment. And I think, I could be wrong, he has funded a nonprofit that his name is not attached to, just so that there's no conflict with that. But yeah, he's a good guy.
Yeah, he is.
Sorry.
But, I was giving you a hard time about The Matrix 4. We've had differing opinions, but anyways. But we are here to talk about Shaun of the Dead from 2004. Just to get started, how were you introduced to this movie?
Shaun of the Dead. That's taking it back. Well, I am a zombie person. I know usually it's a zombie or vampires. This is the conversation you have. And I've always been in love with zombie films. I had a cousin who sat me down for Night of the Living Dead at way too young an age, probably 6 or 7.
Okay.
So usually a zombie movie comes out and I'm right there to watch it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, for me, when this movie came out, I kind of had a little bit of zombie fatigue. The same year the remake of Dawn of the Dead was coming out, the Zack Snyder one that was written by James Gunn.
28 Days Later, I think, was
28
around that
Days
time.
Later came out 2 years prior, I believe.
2 years before.
And so at that point, for me, the genre was a little bit dead in the water. I initially didn't really think much of it. And I will tell you, the way I found out about it kind of made me raise my eyebrow thinking, okay, well, this is something I definitely need to check out. I was actually, believe it or not, at a Dawn of the Dead reunion. And George Romero himself and Ken Foree, the star, actually, a bunch of people were there, but I remember specifically those two people would not stop talking about this movie called Shaun of the Dead. And I remember even thinking the title even sounded a little cheesy and goofy. So I really kind of brushed it off. But when you actually start hearing the man himself bragging about this movie you need to check out, I was like, all right, that's the type of movie I definitely need to see. Because again, at the time, I was very much over the genre.
I think the story is, too, he screened it by himself.
Yeah, down here in Florida, actually.
Yeah.
Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg, they really thought that they were going to reinvigorate the genre. So they were super depressed when they found out that Danny Boyle was doing a zombie movie and was coming out before them. And then when they heard that the Americans were doing one, Universal does Dawn of the Dead and they did Shaun of the Dead. And they actually delayed Shaun of the Dead a couple weeks to not interfere with the release of the Dawn of the Dead release. They hadn't seen a zombie movie coming out in forever. And it kind of reminded me, this is kind of a weird reference, but did you ever see the movie Thin Red Line?
Yes.
Okay. So it's directed by Terrence Malick, who famously didn't direct movies for 20 years after he had a horrible experience shooting one of his last movies. And so he went in to basically direct a retirement. He finally comes out of retirement, does this fantastic movie. I love Thin Red Line. I don't know how much you love that movie, but he picks coming out of retirement after 20 years, the wrong year to make a war movie because the exact same year Private Ryan comes out and of course sweeps the entire Oscars, and they were both up against each other for like every category. But of course, when Spielberg decides to do a war movie, you can't, But if you look at Thin Red Line, it's a fantastic movie. It just picked the wrong year to come out of retirement for. So I always think of that when I read about how Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg were like, well, we're going to make the zombie movie. No one's done a zombie movie in years. And it kind of backfired. Watching this movie, there's a couple times like when he's riding on the bus and everyone's coughing. I got to tell you, watching this movie now, it is completely different watching movies like this. Sean didn't really know or didn't believe and stuff. And so it is interesting to watch a movie like this post-COVID. This is the type of movie that rewards repeat viewings.
Absolutely.
I mean, this is not a one-timer movie at all.
No. This is like a masterclass in like foreshadowing.
We just did a great screening right here in my house. I was elbowing you a bunch of times. Like I'm diving in deeper. I'm watching things in the background. I'm seeing that every single line in this movie comes back again.
Has They're just recycled conversations that work so perfectly in whatever context it's being used.
This
at the
movie
time.
is a zombie ink blot. It really is. It's like what lines mean before you find out that the zombie apocalypse is broken out, and then what they mean post-apocalypse.
Yeah,
it's just
pretty brilliant.
Simon Pegg co-wrote this with Edgar Wright, and he used to be roommates with Nick Frost for years. So they're all friends. And I think a lot of that is very easy to see up on screen. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Definitely Simon and Nick.
For sure.
Yeah.
It's like this shorthand in conversation with them.
It doesn't feel like
not
acting.
Full sentences. Yeah. They're just in rhythm with each other.
And you can tell that with the three of them working together, they had done that on Spaced before, which was the TV show they did before Shaun of the Dead. But man, there really is a chemistry that's going on. I mean, this is a romance movie, and I mean, you can pretty much
rom-zom-com, as they say.
Yeah, and you could definitely say there's him trying to get Liz back, but for most of the movie,
the love affairs between Shaun and Ed.
Yeah, Bill Nighy, the zombie guy, this screening right here. That's all right.
He's fantastic.
Dude, he's so great in this movie, but he is definitely the British Christopher Walken. He has such a cadence to his voice. Like he talks so slow and so specifically.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
So pointedly. It's like, how much is that him just naturally in his cadence, and how much was it his character as Philip?
Penelope Wilton, who plays Barbara, when you go back and watch it a second and third time, she's the person you need to always be watching, especially when he like repeats the plan over and over again.
Yes,
like how, dude, I gotta tell you, her face is the best.
Hilarious.
They do this flash cut where they go right from Ed and Shaun are bashing over Philip with a head, and she has this look of terror, and then it flash cuts to them holding her hand and running off, and she's so happy.
Smiling and happy.
And, you know, the way she's holding up the mugs and stuff. She is the best part of that sequence.
She's fantastic, yeah. They had actually offered Barbara to Helen Mirren. And I guess she had declined it, but said that she would prefer to play Ed because he had all the best lines.
Yeah. If you didn't have a crush on Helen Mirren before reading that, the fact that she wanted to play Ed, I would have loved to see her interpretation of Ed. She is so awesome. I've always loved her. She's fantastic. Every single scene you're watching, you tell that it's Edgar Wright that's the star of every one of those scenes, and why. He is the movie star in all of his movies. It's his blocking, it's his transitions, his timing, his knowledge of cinema. Let's get into some of the history. Shaun, Nick, and Simon worked on a TV show called Spaced. Did you ever watch that, you said?
I've seen a handful of episodes, but I haven't seen it all the way through.
Did you ever see episode 3 of season 1 called Art? Where he takes a bunch of cheap amphetamines and
he's playing like
he thinks
Resident
he's in
Evil,
the Resident Evil video game.
Yeah.
They had so much fun making that episode. They're like, well, we should make a zombie movie. Both Wright and Pegg wrote the script in an apartment in Soho. They were shopping the movie around, and they had a real hard time. Edgar Wright had only directed one small, dinky little movie before this called Fistful of Fingers, so he wasn't an established director.
He likes these parody titles, right? Like a Fistful of
he likes doing like parodies of genres and stuff like
Yeah.
that. No one was really taking the movie serious. The title they didn't like. They had never heard of Edgar Wright. They never really heard any of the stars.
Right.
But they were shopping it around, and they were originally working with a company called Film 4 Productions, but they ended up doing that movie Death to Smoochie.
Yes, I love that with Robin Williams and Edward Norton. I love that movie.
So bad in the theaters that it bankrupted Film 4 Productions.
It's dark, but it's great.
I need to watch it again.
Yes.
Well, obviously it didn't find its audience.
No.
And it bankrupted the Film 4 Productions, so they had to start all over again trying to find funding because they had struck a deal with them, but then they went bankrupt because of Death to Smoochie. But yeah, they ended up working with Working Title Productions. It had a budget of $4 million, ended up grossing $30 million. And then obviously became a huge cult sensation. You don't realize how absolutely low budget this movie was. They really made $4 million
stretched.
This is the first of the Cornetto trilogy. That includes obviously Hot Fuzz and At World's End.
It is a preferred hangover cure.
It is,
for Mr. Wright.
Yeah, we call them like Nutty Buddies over here, like the little ice cream treats over here. We don't have Cornettos, but Cornetto started doing a lot of sales because of the movie, so they shipped them like a whole bunch of samples of the Cornettos.
Oh, nice.
After the Shaun of the Dead. They wrote it into Hot Fuzz thinking they would get more free ice cream. They didn't get any more free ice cream. Yeah. So they were at the Hot Fuzz premiere. A press person went up and asked him, they said, hey, so you've got Cornettos in both movies. Are you going to make this a trilogy? He made a joke. He's like, yeah, we're going to make it like the Kezlowski trilogy. So that's how they ended up making the Cornetto trilogy. They have nothing in common except for an ice cream treat.
Except for the Cornettos, yeah.
That's how the myth and legend of that came to be. Just looking over all the movies that Edgar has written, man, he writes like really selfish characters. Scott Pilgrim's a super selfish character.
Right. Very self-involved.
Yeah, Shaun, Ed. A lot of these characters you look throughout the movies, he writes these really selfish characters. You fall in love with these characters, but they're still like super selfish.
On the surface, very unlikable.
Yeah, they got to go through something for you to like them. We've already talked about how this movie rewards repeat viewers. I got to tell you, as a Dawn of the Dead fan, just hearing the original Dawn of the Dead theme song going over the Universal logo, you know you're in for a treat when you turn on the movie the first time. I do want to talk about foreshadowing. This is one of the movies that, as far as like, if you want to see how much absolute fun you can have playing with the audience and tinkering with them, bringing them back for repeat viewings, rewarding those repeat viewings, this is a movie as far as foreshadowing goes.
They did it well from the jump.
Oh my God.
They played with it in each of the 3
Oh yeah, for
Cornetto.
sure.
So that is a theme that actually carries through for all three films. But
yeah. The obvious one you have to talk about is the Ed speech.
right, the first time at the Winchester, yeah.
You know, so he mentions we'll have a Bloody Mary, which is obviously a zombie they kill in the backyard. Then he says we're going to take a bite at the king's head, which is Philip, the father, or a couple of the little princesses when they pick up the girls. Stagger back here after
the zombie workshop.
And then bang, back at the bar for shots, which is pretty self-explanatory. But just going back and watching that stuff again and connecting the dots is such a blast to do. Small things like Snake Hips is always surrounded by women.
Women, right.
Yeah, and then when he's killed the zombie version, he's getting chewed up on by women, which is awesome. Yep. Video game instructions where he's like top left, reload, and then that comes back in the Winchester shootout, which is fantastic. Small things like when he's talking to Liz and he's trying to get her back, he's like, it'll be just the two of us, things will change. And then at the end of the movie, it is just the two of them.
Right.
When he goes to get Liz back and he can't climb up the apartment wall, but then later on when he has to save her, he immediately is able to climb up. When he takes the phone call at a 4E electronics store and he's mocking Liz and he mimics like he's blowing his brains out, and then later on, we're skipping all the way to the end of the movie, but they're talking about doing a couple's suicide.
Yes, a murder-suicide. Yes.
And so he has to like mimic it to see if he can actually go through it. And he's like, all right, so if I shoot you.
And then I got to cock the gun.
And then he does the blowing the brains out. And I was like, oh my God, he's actually going through the motions. Like, no, I don't think I can do that.
I think some of the interaction between Pete and Ed, the next time I see you, he'll be dead, or something. Next time I see him, he'll be dead. Those kind of things.
You want to live like an animal, live in the shed.
Live in the shed, exactly. Yep. With Shaun, all his like trips to the corner store, the bodega. I always want to call it a bodega, but just even seeing the kid with the ball. Oh, you're dead. You know what I mean? There's just so many of those.
Just doing that walk the second time and seeing how it plays out with a jogger, normally doing a normal jog, and then he's
him
coming
running,
back and he's like sprinting. Yeah. One of the things I wanted to talk about was how he blocks a lot of his scenes. He meticulously storyboards everything, not just his action sequences, but even storyboards his dialogue. This is what I was talking about earlier when I say that Edgar Wright is the star of his movies. The first scene of the movie is the bar scene where we introduce all the different characters, but it's all based on camera angles. So Liz and Shaun are having this discussion. She's mentioning you spend too much time with Ed, but they're saying things you wouldn't say in front of someone else if they were there.
Like they're not there.
Then they take the camera angle, and that's when you realize that you're dealing with a director who is using the tricks of camera angles, because when you know that everyone's actually already in that scene, you're involved in it the second time. But the first time, he's cutting you off by inches of just these angles. And then they go into the dialogue about her best friends, Diane and David, and they're just out of frame too. And when you watch other comedies, you're watching Eddie Murphy, you're watching Jim Belushi, you're watching Jim Carrey be Jim Carrey, but these are flatly shot comedies. They're not playing with different angles. You're not watching Ace Ventura because Tom Shadyac blocked the cameras correctly. You know what I mean? Nothing he did in that movie was funny. He's just shooting it wide and letting Jim Carrey just rip through these lines, and that's most comedies. But when you watch Shaun of the Dead, and it's the first scene, it's the first introduction to the movie. That's when you know that you're dealing with someone who's going to treat this comedy a lot differently.
Yeah.
Even like later on when he takes a phone call from Liz, he's having that discussion with Noel from 4E Electronics, and he's like, well, I can separate my business and personal life, and then the phone comes out of frame. Well, that's the blocking, is not seeing the person who's actually entering the phone into frame. And later on, Nick is standing in front of the wrecked car, and he's like, where's the car? And he slides to the side because he's been hiding the wreckage. He's been hiding it the whole time.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, it is, because the blocking becomes the comedy of this movie.
A little piece of blocking that really struck me the last time I watched it was the introduction of Pete both times in the mirror. I think is so friggin' cool. You're in the bathroom. It's like your most vulnerable place that you can be in your home. All of a sudden there's someone there. The first time it's just your flatmate. The next time maybe not so much, but
that's an ode to American Werewolf in London when he does the mirror gag like that.
Bloody Mary, right? She works at Landis Market, right?
She does work at Landis. So you have like 4E Electronics. Ken Foree was the star of Dawn of the Dead. John Landis. Later on, he says, I'll make reservations at the place that does the fish. Fulci's, which is based on Lucio Fulci, the famous Italian director.
Father of Italian
But dude, if you don't freeze frame this movie, you're not going to get all the jokes. That's the other thing. Edgar Wright doesn't slow down for you at all. You have to freeze frame these things.
Much, yes.
I could talk for hours about this, but the sound design in Edgar Wright's movie, it's not over the top. It's perfectly matched for the hyper energy of the editing and the pacing. This movie's super fast paced. I think it's just barely over 90 minutes. And there's a lot to cram in, but the sound design just really keeps you pushing forward, and it's so over the top.
Some of those transitions remind me of Guy Ritchie too, like in Snatched, different scenes.
A lot of whip hands. He plans out his transitions a lot, and the sound design definitely helps out with that. That's obviously something that echoes all the way through to Baby Driver and a lot of other movies. When Sean goes to get Liz and Diane and David, he dials their apartment number. Diane picks up the phone and she's like, hello. So she hears all these moans and moans and moans, and she gets ready to hang up the phone. As soon as she hangs up the phone, the moans continue because it's Sean climbing up the wall. He knows how to use sound design to tie things all together like that. And it's another way to comedically tell a funny story. And I love that. Baby Driver is the ultimate example of this. If you haven't seen Baby Driver, I highly recommend to anyone. It's so good. Basically, the whole movie is synced to the beat of the music. You can definitely see the beginnings of those type of comedic seeds in the way he wants to always sync a lot of scenes up. Shaun of the Dead, like the opening sequence, obviously everyone's the zombies, and even with the kid kicking the soccer ball, that's all done to the beat of the song. The Shaun of the Dead and her group. It's very interesting that there is a very similar version of him walking around that is going the opposite direction in life every single time.
Making maybe better choices, right?
Always.
Right?
You and I laughed so hard at the screening because at one point she's like, how you been? He says, I'm surviving, which comes back into play later. He goes, how you doing? And she says the word, I bought a house or bought a place.
And he's like,
you bought? How do you bought? Like you could tell, like just the emphasis on that one word, you could tell that he is a renter for life.
Such a mundane thing where you're walking down the street, you see a friend, but there's a car accident that's happened right next to them. Like somebody is dead. And like all this craziness is happening.
There's always something going on in the background. Funny. This is obviously not a revelation, but Sean's timing is always off in this movie, getting reservations for tables and stuff like that. But even small things like the one and only time that David takes his glasses off, Sean has his back turned to him and he's pissed off and he turns around and he's got this one big zinger line. He's like, go get fucked, Four Eyes, or whatever he says to him. And that's the one time he took the glasses off. So his timing was even off on that one joke.
He is becoming more sure of himself, though. It's kind of like when Ed throws him the hoodlums and like smacks him in the head, at the beginning, but then he's catching it by the ones that Davids are throwing.
If you think of Hoglumps as life, and life is smacking you in the head, and then later on when you're becoming a man and you're able to grab life like out of the air. I like that. If you want to make the comparison of Hoglumps in life. But yeah, this whole movie is an allegory for becoming a man and accepting responsibility. If you want to think of Ed and Liz on either shoulder of Sean,
the angel
Ed
and the
is
devil.
Everything. He's into porn, he's into doing drugs, no filter on his language, and then Liz counts for responsibility and commitment, and so there's a lot of that. And then there's bigger tones, we'll talk about this later, but him having to shoot his own mother and
there's
stuff.
Some really tough life lessons that are going on in this film. It is brutal.
This whole movie's an allegory for growing up, accepting responsibility, being able to move on and do the right thing, and then sometimes if you want to look at Nick living in the shed at the end, sometimes being able to keep a little bit of your childhood still with you, to have a balance of it. I did want to talk about some of the cultural differences. I thought it was funny that in the movie you hear the news talking about how they blame the zombie apocalypse on the Americans. I don't know if you heard that in the news clips.
I didn't catch that one.
Yeah, they blame the Americans.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Because it would stem from here. That's
such a sad state of affairs when we have to admit that as Americans.
For sure.
Yeah.
That would be
we'd
us.
take that responsibility for sure.
Absolutely.
Or if not, we'd probably blame someone else. But that's fine. That's a whole other thing.
Blame Canada.
First time I watched this movie, he's trying to call the police or the fire department or the ambulance or whatever, and he keeps saying it's engaged. I didn't know what that meant the first time. I was like, why does he keep saying that? It didn't dawn on me till later on. He meant, it's getting, he's getting a busy signal. Sean and Ed always have a completely different face throughout the entire movie. Every big event that happens, like when he types, I'm a prick. And so they have completely different faces on the couch like that.
You watch those scenes and it is just a true friendship. You're like, I love them. Oh my God, why are they doing this? Why'd you say that? Or just like them leaving the bar drunk, singing White Lines. It's one of my favorite sequences.
I love it. Yeah. And that's another scene that's synced up to music, of course. And it plays with the zombies and stuff like that in the background. And it's timed perfectly. When they kill Bloody Mary the first time, Sean is in horror that he possibly killed somebody, and it's like got this. That's on you, man. I didn't do that type of look. Same thing when they kill the groom zombie, they got completely different faces on.
With the ashtray.
With the ashtray, when they bash in Hulk and Bloody Mary's heads at the first time, completely different faces on that. When they're at the bottom of the stairs and they're trying, dude, when they're trying to whisper,
"Oi, prick!"
Yeah.
A Pete.
Even at the end when they realized the Winchester shotgun was loaded the entire time, like the look on Sean's face, and then Nick was like, "I told you!" Like they always have completely different faces. And we talk about reoccurring themes throughout this movie. There's certain scenes where Sean is so happy that certain people are dead. When he phones his mom the first time, I apologize. He's not a great son. His mom called him. I forgot about him. Let me correct that.
Yes, he was calling Liz to make
correct.
sure she was okay.
Sorry.
And then mom came through because Liz was engaged.
Shame on me. Yeah. So I
it's a
apologize.
bit soon, isn't it?
When he finds out that it was Philip who got bit, he's like, oh, that's okay. He's like,
and then Ed's like, what happened?
When Ed puts in the tape deck the first time and he runs somebody over, the corpse that has the leg bent over behind his back, and Nick Frost lands that shot perfectly. Are you okay? I love when the bones start to creak. Oh, thank God he's dead. And I thought that was kind of funny that he gets like super excited about people being dead. Certain ones. I'm sure this comes from Edgar and Simon, how they can interject more horror tropes and stuff. When he goes up to reveal that Pete, the sommelier from John Wick, is naked and a zombie, I'm uncomfortable because A, you're naked.
Right.
And
you're in the shower and you're a zombie. And how do I
love
address
this? It's like double uncomfortable. Like your wiener's out and you're trying to kill me.
It's
so
I'm
super
wiener.
uncomfortable.
Like I can't do
But
this.
he's like stuttering. He's, we're just going to go down to the pub. You're more than... And then he pauses and he says, join us. Just that little bit of pause in that sentence becomes a horror trope and becomes funnier. Just adding 3 dots in the script. Instead of connecting and say, you're more than welcome to join us. You're more than welcome to join us. When you watch this movie over and over again, you can tell that there are movie fans writing this movie. Anytime Sean has to tell the truth, his mouth almost retracts, like back into his face. He's like kind of scared of the truth. When he tells his mom that Philip was touching him and then he has to confide and tell the truth, his mouth kind of like curls up, like sucks back in. And then when he has to admit about the flowers are not for Liz, his mouth again sucks back into his mouth. And when he has to admit to Liz that he did not ditch the zombies and they followed him back to the Winchester, and he's like, oh my God, they followed us. And he just, his chin tucks into his mouth. And I love that he has like a real problem telling the truth. Like it's almost like allergic to the truth or something. He's like
suspended adolescence. What is the term
maybe,
for
and
that?
that would probably fit into this.
It's very much
allegory.
like as a kid. Oh gosh,
it's him shying away from responsibility for sure. But I comedically, it's funny to watch him like kind of twitch in place. One of the things that's so good about Edgar Wright is that he's able to interject a lot of drama into his movies, where he's able to break up some really serious scenes with comedy. Philip gives him this
brilliant speech.
Great speech.
Oh my gosh, it's heartbreaking.
It's tough to be a father speech.
Yes.
And then he turns into the zombie, gets everyone out of the car. No part of that man you loved left in that car. And of course, in his dying like zombie breath, he reaches over and Philip turns off the music and you hear this click. Just breaks up that scene a little bit more.
Yeah, they reconciled just before, and then the whole time he's complaining about loud music that Ed's put in with that tape. Yeah.
First time I saw that, I thought it was the child locks, which I thought would have been a funny reoccurring gag too, but it was the music that he was starting out. Either way, they're having the talk about shooting his mom. Everyone obviously in a pressure cooker situation, everyone's got a weapon pointed at each other. That's the most tense scene in the whole movie, in my opinion. And he breaks it up with the fact that Ed and Sean are having major issues with the fact that David's using the word zombie. I mean, they're holding like weapons at each other's necks.
Which is the same conversation they had earlier. And I love how sweet Ed is to Diane. She's like, this isn't fair. And so he hands over his bottle for her.
Here, I'll make it fair for you. He hands him Diane a broken bottle, but then she points it at Sean's neck.
Yeah.
And so I got a backtracking question because earlier on when Pete was getting into Sean about the front door being left open, Sean gets defensive and he's like, I'm not saying it's you. It was Ed. And Sean breathes a sigh of relief.
Yeah.
Well, later on in the movie, when the room comes through with missing arm zombie comes through, it's because Sean just got back from his...
Sean. It's never Ed. He never took the blame for the door open. It was always Sean. That's why I love when they said that about making sure your doors are closed.
Right, in the news.
Nick kind of looks at...
That's so funny.
Looks at
I love that. So
when
he's like, I'll make it fair. I'll give you the broken bottle. And he points it at Sean. I'm like, well, wait a second. Shouldn't you have like offered to have it at your neck? You know, but the way that Edgar can break up some real heartbreaking scenes. You've been in love with Sean and Ed as a couple throughout this whole 90-minute movie. Ed is dying and they have this touching moment. You're on the verge of tears because Ed's dying. He's one of the most charismatic characters in the movie. And he does the reoccurring fart joke, and he just breaks up the scene with that fart joke. I don't think I've ever watched a scene where I was on the verge of tears like that, but also did that kind of like nervous, like chuckle out loud laugh.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's when you know that Edgar Wright can take an audience and have them in the palm of his hands. Yeah. When you can do both emotions.
There's a timing. They've completed that beat. He gives them the cigarette. They're head to head. You have that emotional oomph.
When you have sadness and comedy, those are so opposing emotions, and for Edgar Wright to be able to do a scene like that where you can have both of those emotions in that same frame, that's
brilliant.
Is fantastic. You can have a lump in your throat and still laugh super hard.
What's that thing about laughing at a funeral too? Like there'll be something that's just, I remember when I was at my grandma's funeral, my cousin and I were dying in the pews. It was just some story that we told about her that had us giggling, and we could not stop. But there is something that goes together with that, and that sadness and laughter.
Yeah, it's kind of a nice release, Yeah. Speaking of nice release, when you realize that this movie, terrible transition after talking about that. Yeah, but
perfect.
When you realize that this movie, there's like basically a 90-minute setup for that fart joke. Yeah, I mean, really, if you think about it, like this whole movie, pretty much getting wind up for that one fart joke.
That was really close to the right. That was right after
one of the first jokes.
Yep.
I think one of the last jokes. It's the last real laugh out loud joke for sure.
Absolutely. Nick Frost as Ed. Obviously, Helen Mirren said she wanted the best. He makes some fantastic choices. Just that weird patch of hair that's missing. That was like a character.
He had a backstory to that. He had lost a bet and he had to shave a clump out of his hair. Right, like
he was the type of guy that would get so drunk and there'd be shenanigans. Yeah. He has a tendency to itch.
In certain areas.
Yeah, he was shaving.
Yeah, he was shaving to an uncomfortable amount. So he was constantly scratching his nether regions. That's method right there.
That's method.
Working title did not want him
Nick Frost?
Yeah, they did not. At the time, he was busting tables again. He said he spent all his spaced money in months. So he was back busting tables again, working in the food industry when they hired him for Shaun.
Wow.
If you can believe that.
That's wild.
It's insane. Yeah. And so Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg insisted, like, look, this role is written for him. It's
like
him.
We literally wrote it for him.
There's a chimpanzee impersonation he does that Nick Frost does. You know, you have to put him in this role. But he's fantastic.
There would not be an Ed if there was not a Nick Frost.
And he's fantastic in it. And again, you can't hire, you can't pay for it, and you definitely can't write the chemistry of those two. Yeah. No way.
Yeah. No. Not at all. I love as Ed, just watching him throughout, you really kind of feel like he's just living a video game. Yeah. Let's be fair. He gets in the car and he wants to get in this Jag. And what does he want to do? Once he's hit the first zombie, we're going to hit all the zombies now. Like there's that one part.
Almost like a Jaguar Frogger.
Exactly. And Shaun's just trying to get to the Winchester. This is his mission. Why are you going this way? It's a shortcut. And he's like, no, that street goes right to the Winchester. He's like, oh yeah, everything's fine. Don't worry.
Yeah, he's definitely in his own world, man. Taking phone calls right in the middle of like the zombie apocalypse and doing like donuts with the Jaguar and upgrading to the Jaguar. You can tell this guy is like doing like level up Grand Theft Auto type shit in the middle of the zombie apocalypse, because the way he's really going for it, almost Point Break style, you know. You can tell like he might be thinking, I don't think I'm going to make it through the next day or two, so I'm going out in a blaze of flame.
Everything I wanted to do that I've done on
I'm playing the tape deck and the Jaguar, and I'm pulling e-brake spin outs and everything. Yeah, he loved it, so he was having a good time. That definitely contrasts with someone who's just trying to survive with their deer hunter headband on and everything, just trying to make it through with their girlfriends.
The relationships are really very, very interesting. Like when you start looking at like Di and David on Liz's side.
You get this sense just from the blocking that David's sneaking his way back into Liz's life and stuff. Oh, dude, when they have to kill Shaun's mom and he says something to the effect of, well, that was the right thing to do. Dude, he had that bloody nose coming, man.
Absolutely, he did. In terms of homages to zombie movies, his death.
Oh man, the Day of the Dead rip apart. Yes, fantastic. It's awesome.
And nobody deserved it more in that film. I loved it.
That was a great kill.
Because just 5 minutes before that, it's the one thing that's bothered me rewatching it now is he pulled that trigger.
Yeah, when you and I watched it this time, when he pulled it and it goes click because he didn't know there wasn't any bullets, I literally said to you out loud, I can't believe he pulled that trigger. I forgot he did that.
Murder. To kill Shaun, to have Liz.
Can you imagine that would have been the end of the movie? Jeez, what a jerk move, man. God. He had that rip apart coming for sure. Whenever someone is about to die, they always reconcile with Shaun. Obviously, Philip, his mom. And then we were just talking about David right before he gets ripped apart. Once he gets pulled through the window.
He's about to. Diane says, maybe I'm not the one you should be apologizing to.
Right.
He goes to
That's
stand
right.
in front of the window, says Sean, and then they pull
But
him
he was getting
through.
ready to
He's
at
getting
least-
ready
yeah.
to.
Yeah, so he's getting ready to
Maybe
reconcile.
some kind of redemption after you just try to kill him.
But I like that. I like that everyone tries at least,
At least a little bit,
on the
yeah.
way out the door or try to or out the window. Do you think Diane lived?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
No.
There's a DVD extra.
Oh,
On
did
the,
she?
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, now it's not told in the movie, so of course you take your own interpretation. I just want to know what your feeling is. But
I mean,
in the,
she might have like fallen back on her acting
maybe,
skills.
yeah, she could have zombied her way out.
I love that scene with her leading the zombie workshop.
There's a DVD extra called Plot Holes, and in that DVD extra, they have a subplot where she hid up in the top of a tree, and then once the zombie apocalypse was over, she went and lived with her aunt.
Oh, nice.
So you can believe it or not, but yeah.
I mean, she was determined when she ran out. She was determined, but I don't know.
Noel from 4E Electronics.
Yes, Noodles.
Ed was his drug dealer.
Yes, because he only had a Henry.
Right.
Which is what? An eighth.
That's right.
Sorry.
You know your drug talk. Very good. I'm proud of you.
Another
Yeah.
Different
Copy that. When he goes in to buy the cornetto at the shopkeep, the second time, he says, hey, I owe you 15
quid.
Yeah. Later on, the shopkeeper zombie's got his hand out.
Yeah, he wants
that
everyone
else
extra
is
money.
out for brains, and he's the one zombie has his hand underneath, and he's looking for change.
It's brilliant how they did that.
Any other comedy, they would have drawn so much attention to that. But in an Edgar Wright movie, you have to go back and watch them multiple times. Like, oh, does he have his hand out for change?
That's part of what some of those news stories were saying, right? There was a proclivity for them to go back to what was normal for them.
Yeah.
So even when they call out Pete, when he comes out, poor Ed gets bitten. That's how Sean gets his attention. He calls him by his name, and Pete looks up and stands up. So Noodles is back pushing carts. Or Noel, sorry.
I wanted to backtrack a second. I forgot we didn't even talk about this, but the way that the news and the TV stations, the way you flip the channels, was the way they told the story.
Brilliant.
There's just so many like creative ways to keep pushing forward and moving the story and the plot. Did you ever see Into the Spider-Verse?
No.
Oh, dude, it's so good.
The Chris Gaines, Tobey Maguire sequence in the third Spider-Man. I say Chris Gaines as in Garth Brooks. Sorry, that's mean.
Gotcha.
But I don't think I've seen a Spider-Man after that.
Copy that. All right. Well, the animated one is fantastic.
Gotcha.
If you get the chance, Into the Spider-Verse is... I mean, I have a 10-year-old and I watch it with her.
But you're
Moments into it, you realize there's some brilliant stuff going on in this movie. It's very good.
Okay.
But anyways, we'll do an Into the Spider-Verse podcast later on down the road. But they do a Shaun of the Dead reference up in Times Square. They have a big billboard for a movie that's called From Dusk Till Shaun.
From Dusk Till Shaun.
Which apparently was going to be the title of a sequel they were going to do. If you're a fan of Phineas and Ferb, Sean and Ed show up as their characters in an episode called Night of the Living Pharmacists. So they show up in that episode and voice their own characters. Since it's a Disney show, obviously the Got Wood shirt is a little
something different. Didn't they ended up in Land of the Dead too,
Land of the
right?
Dead. 2005, they had Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg come out and play zombies in chains. Did you ever see that movie?
Land of the Dead?
Yeah,
yes, I did.
When I saw it in theater, there wasn't a whole lot of people there, sadly. And I don't know if a lot
Land
of people...
of the Dead isn't one of my favorites.
It's the last really, really, really good Romero film. That was the last one I really cared for. Yeah, of course. But I like Land of the Dead. I like Dennis Hopper and I like John Leguizamo.
I just always felt, I was just like, are they going to unionize now? That's not like, that was my I'm like, okay, all right.
Yeah. Coldplay and Chris Martin are in there. Chris Martin is the godfather to Simon Pegg's daughter. Simon Pegg is the godfather to Chris Martin and Gwyneth Paltrow's kid. When Coldplay has performed, occasionally one of the backup singers has been Simon Pegg's daughter.
That's so cool.
Yeah, he also recorded some zombie sound effects. At the end of the movie, when he's yawning again and he's walking on the new white carpet, there's a newscaster can be heard. Initial claims that the virus was caused by rage-infected monkeys can now be dismissed as bull. And then they click the remote before he gets to say the word bullshit. That's Edgar Wright, and that's his little payback against 28 Days Later. Because famously, Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright do not believe in fast-moving zombies. They very much ascribe to the George Romero, the old school ways. Yeah. Again, this goes back to connecting Morrissey music videos with news footage.
Right, brilliant how they did that.
I just love right when he's getting ready to call the infected monkeys zombies virus. Bullshit. He clicks with the remote. It's great. He knows when to edit to get another joke out of you.
The newspapers do the same kind of thing with the headlines too.
Yeah, and there's some more homages in there to Let Sleeping Corpses Lie, which is an old UK zombie movie. The American Werewolf in London, the soundtrack, almost every song has the word moon in the title of the songs.
Right.
Same thing with Shaun of the Dead. I mean, the band Zombie does one of the songs in there. They have these great ways of paying homages to horror, but also being comedically funny and cheeky about it. We're also talking about that final scene with him and Liz. She basically does the Ed speech in reverse, but she talks about how let's go down to the Phoenix pub. Well, the Phoenix pub is the Winchester reborn from the ashes since it was burnt down.
Brilliant.
Isn't that
I didn't
kinda
even
cool?
catch that.
So she mentions, let's go down to the Phoenix pub. And
that's fun.
Yeah, that's the Winchester being brought back to life.
That's very cool.
Yeah, it's cool, right? So in the UK, their version of Wah Wah is called Landis. Now, obviously, the Americans aren't going to get that reference, so they changed it to Landis, which is obviously John Landis, the director of American Werewolf in London and Thriller. Bloody Mary, who we know works at Landis. They kill her in the garden. You see her name tag. Peg would later go on to work for John Landis for a movie called Burke and Hare, which came out in 2010. That movie also starred the actor Michael Smiley, who's been in a bunch of other stuff. He was in a movie called Free Fire. But anyways, he used to be flatmates with Nick and Sean, and back then he was an acid DJ, and his DJ name was Smiley Riley. And so so they took that
Smiley
name and they
Riley.
made Sean Smiley Riley. But also he played a character named Tires on Spaced. All the zombies were told to wear very bland, boring clothes, nothing, no colors of pop. But there's one zombie that he's a bicyclist with a yellow bright hat.
Yeah.
That's Michael Smiley.
Okay.
So,
Very
so that's a
cool.
zombie.
Okay.
And so that's where the Smiley Riley came from. I went to England a couple of years ago.
Okay.
When I knew I was going over to England, I said, hey, I have to do the Shaun of the Dead walk. So I actually went to the place where they had Sean's house.
Yeah.
And I had my daughter, and we did the walk. And I even did the tripping going up the curb, and I went to the convenience store. I did the Shaun of the Dead walk with Kaylee. And of course, unfortunately, on camera the whole time, she had just discovered what the middle finger was. She was that young. She had her middle finger up the entire walk. So I don't know if it's usable. But anyways, so I went in, and of course, I got the Cornetto, and I got the Diet Coke. And I love that in the world of Shaun of the Dead, that Diet Coke means you're making a little effort towards change. Because it goes originally gets the normal,
Coke.
The more sugary normal Coke. But then he's like, I'm going to try to get Liz back, so I'm going to change this to Diet Coke. I did get the Diet Coke, and I do actually still have the Diet Coke can. And for me, it's just
that's awesome.
It's a great symbol because I love taking my daughter traveling, but I love the fact that I have the Diet Coke, and it always means to me that I'm trying to be a little bit better and trying to put forth a little effort, and it's my little Shaun of the Dead reference.
I love that.
But in an ironic twist, I did want to show you this picture, and of course, pictures don't do so well on podcasts, but I did want to show you this quick picture. So that's Kaylee in front of Sean's house.
Yes.
And then this is Kaylee and I in front of the convenience store, which has now been changed into a Landis convenience store. Isn't that hilarious? The irony of that?
That is brilliant.
That's my little tie in there.
No, I love that.
It looks like garbage, I think, to most people, but I don't think people realize if I had like a Diet Coke put on a shrine or any kind of like more prevalent area in this house. Because you know how like some college students, they have these walls of beer cans and shit that they do? I don't want people to think I just normally have empty Coke cans like garbage. Yeah. But that meant so much for me to bring that Diet Coke all the way back over here to the States. And it's a symbol to me that I'm trying to get a little bit better with every day. So I love that Diet Coke can means so much more to me than garbage. I don't display it more.
There's great meaning there because this movie is a lot. I mean, we focused on the comedy and stuff. Well, we kind of talked about it in the beginning. There's a lot of deep meaning to a lot of the things that are happening.
It's Sean's journey to responsibility.
And adulthood. I really enjoyed it in 2004 when I saw it, and to see it now, it holds up remarkably well. And just the difference in perspective is amazing when you watch it now. Yeah, as opposed to then.
For me, in a world of COVID, it's a little challenging to idolize a character who knows there's a deadly virus outbreak and only makes a handful of failed plans to wait till this all blows over instead of working towards a solution. That being said, this is the very definition of low-budget filmmaking at its finest. Much like Edgar Wright's heroes like Sam Raimi and what they did with Evil Dead, what you can do with creativity with no budget in mind, I think that's what this movie really speaks to. But definitely the biggest takeaway from this film is watch it more than once. Rosa, I can't thank you enough for coming out and
Oh my gosh,
discussing
thanks
this.
for having
Thanks
me
for the
again.
screening too. I love
Absolutely.
watching this movie. I love watching all movies with you, but definitely you and I just kicking back and watching a horror comedy. I mean,
It was perfect.
dude. Like
Yeah.
I could do this all day long, man. I can't wait for
Absolutely.
the next one, and I hope to have you on for the Hot Fuzz review, man. Let's do
Yeah,
the
man.
whole Coronado
Blue-
trilogy.
Absolutely.
Let's kill
I'm
it.
here. Bye, bye, bye.
Today, I'm honored to be talking with Dan Mudford, the composer of Shaun of the Dead. Dan, how you doing today?
Very well, thank you. Thank you for having me. I should point out that I'm the co-composer. I co-composed the score with my longtime friend and colleague Pete Woodhead.
So starting back a ways, you were producing a show for MTV when you got a copy of Wright's first movie, A Fistful of Fingers. What were your initial thoughts when you saw his work for the first time?
We used to get a lot of VHSs arriving on our desk, unsolicited. And my initial thought was, oh, good, a 180-minute VHS. That means I can record loads of episodes of The Simpsons over it. But out of courtesy, I did actually watch it before taping over it. And at first, I thought, well, picture quality, it didn't really sort of leap out at me, much beyond a student film. But I really noticed the attention to detail in the sound and the sound design, and it became apparent that if you've got the sound good, then the pictures will take care of themselves almost to a degree. I really thought that there was something here, and it was very witty and obviously very sincere in its appreciation of the spaghetti western genre, but with a genuine wit attached to it. So yeah, it was a pleasure to be able to put it on a couple of slots on a daily movie show that we had. So as I've said before, Edgar does owe his entire career to me, and I should just say to people who spend too much time on the internet, sometimes I lie for comic effect.
So you haven't reached out for residuals then, is what you're saying?
No. But it was a real pleasure to meet Graham, who played the lead in Fistful of Fingers several years later when he played the living statue in Hot Fuzz, which I shot all the behind-the-scenes stuff for. So, yeah, I was like,
that's right,
I get to fanboy you 10 years after.
You and your collaborator Pete Woodhead were in two bands, Oyuki Conjugate and Sons of Silence together. How did you two meet?
We met through a mutual friend who was living in a squat. I don't know if that translates, but a squat is a place where you live rent-free, basically, semi-legally.
Yeah.
And Pete had come down from the north of England and was squatting in a pretty run-down flat with a mutual friend of ours, who rejoiced in the name of Brian Lustmord, who has since gone on to doing lots of stuff with the Melvins in LA, and he's big on the sort of industrial noise scene. And Pete and I immediately became fast friends through a love of dance music and rock and reggae and also films. And him being a couple of years older than me, I was almost like the younger brother. While I was watching Star Wars and the Goonies and Gremlins, he was watching Dario Argento and all this stuff that I'd never heard of. So he introduced me to all that sort of stuff. The stuff that only got shown in late night cinemas or on very dodgy fourth generation VHSs. And one thing led to another, and we started making music as members of a band called Oyuki Conjugate, who are looking for extra players to perform on a European tour with them. And we all just got on really well. And then we decided to sort of go make a sort of splinter and start doing the sort of music that we wanted with another character called Joe Gardner. And so the three of us made the Sons of Silence.
Music from Sons of Silence was used in Edgar and Simon's first show, Spaced. How did that come about?
Well, that, again, an angel came down in the shape of a comic actor called Paul Putner, who was the taxi driver in Shaun of the Dead, who got cut out. That scene got cut out, unfortunately, but you do get to see him ripping Dylan Moran to pieces at the end. And Paul was very hip to the new sounds that the kids were stumbling around to. And he handed Edgar a CD of ours, saying, I think you might like this. And it had loads of film samples on and stuff like that. We had one tune called Jackie Chan, and of course Edgar just went straight for that. He said, never judge a good book by its cover, but you can judge a song by its title. And so, that sort of use of film references, I mean, we sampled things like Mallrats and things, which we thought were pretty obscure, but of course Edgar was all over like a rash, it's like, oh yeah, I love Mallrats, yeah. And then through a mutual friend, Joe Cornish, who directed
Attack the
Attack
Block.
the Block and
Love that movie.
The Would-Be King, yeah. We actually met in his and his girlfriend's kitchen, and we shook hands, and we both simultaneously said, "I really admire your work," which sounds awful,
fantastic.
but I was a huge fan of Spaced, because I was basically exactly like a cross between Simon and Nick's characters, not in a good way necessarily. And so then Edgar said, "Oh, have you got any tracks that we can use for the next series?" And so, yeah, that was how our sort of relationship started, if you like.
After Spaced, Edgar Wright realizes your music fits perfectly with his visuals and asks you to do the score for Shaun of the Dead. Had you scored anything before that?
Yes. Pete and I had scored a couple of documentaries. There was one about ice hockey, one or two other theme tunes for shows and stuff like that. But I think what he liked was the fact that we were that whole sort of invisible soundtracks for films that haven't been made sort of thing that was like pioneered by Barry Adamson and people like that in the early 90s. We had done a couple of soundtracks of very small TV shows, but I don't really think that was on our resume as such, so much as the actual music that we were making was very much in the style of soundtracks for films that hadn't been made. Invisible soundtracks, which was a sort of mini subgenre of the mid-90s. And the fact that we used very sort of cinematic sounds and stuff like that. And bless him, he just sort of had faith. I think there was some pushback probably from the film people saying, look, could you at least have one element of this film that is fairly reliable, like i.e. someone who's done it before? Pete reminded me recently, actually, that I was really worried for quite a long time that because Edgar's such an affable, sociable chap, that he was bound to come into the studio one day and say, hey, guess what? I just met Fatboy Slim or the Chemical Brothers or someone like that. They want to do the soundtrack, and I'd be like, well, yeah, fair enough, But he stuck to his guns, and so very grateful for that, and I like to think we raised our game because of it. It was fairly sort of novice. Certainly it was the first time we'd ever really edited anything to picture, and we kind of invented a way for us to integrate the music and the sounds into the picture itself by literally setting up our studio next to the edit suite, watching a reel and then doing some stuff and then putting it onto CD, because that's what you had to do, and then giving the individual tracks to Chris, the editor, and saying, put this on, try it on, and it goes in there and comes out there. So it kind of became embedded with the soundtrack, so people couldn't unpick it.
So you guys got set up in the office next to them in the Delane Leah?
Yeah, Delane Lee.
Okay. You're in the room right next door to Chris Dickens, the editor, and Edgar's there too. Since he's in such close proximity to you guys, I'm assuming he's coming over and helping and giving notes as far as the score and what he wanted you to do. How involved with this score was Edgar with you guys?
Absolutely. I mean, if he could have, I'm sure if he knew anything about music, I mean, obviously he's got an encyclopedic knowledge of music from the last 40 years. The actual technicalities of sound and stuff like that is something that they don't teach in film school. It's weird. I mean, he didn't go to film school, but, you can learn all about lights and what lights to use and what lenses do and what the effect of changing a lens is. But music sort of somehow retains some sort of abstract mystery for a lot of directors, obviously, John Carpenter being the big exception. So Edgar would come next door. Often Chris had gone home for the evening. Then Edgar, being like a 24-hour working guy, came next door and said, right, so leading up to this cut, or, I want it to go... Ugh! Like this, and he would literally sort of like throw himself at the screen, and I would sometimes have to physically stop him from leaping across the desk and stuff. I'm not going to lie, it was really, really, really hard. No one is prepared for his level of attention to detail. I certainly wasn't. I mean, I've been really good about it since, but this was the first time that I've been like, oh, what, really? I mean, it's, it's a sound that's, in amongst a whip pan of zombies running along, and it's a 9-frame shot that he wants accentuating with a sound that flags it up. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then it became apparent that this was the way it was. A, it was the way it was going to be. And B, this is what made it so good and so watchable, is there is no slackness.
Yeah, there's definitely a connection between what his vision was and your music, for sure.
Yeah, I think one of the problems that young filmmakers have with British crew, there's very much a sort of this'll do attitude towards a lot of what British people do. Edgar knew that people like George Lucas and Steven Spielberg and stuff like that don't do that, subscribe to that, you know. So he said, right, well, I'm not going to either. Otherwise, how am I going to be as good as them? And so, yeah, we all had to really raise our game, and it went on for a lot longer than it should have done. But it was extremely rewarding, and I still watch it every time it's on TV.
You said it took a little longer. It took, 6 months for the whole process, right?
Yeah, normally what happens is they lock the picture, and then the composer's given like 6 weeks, and then the composer hands it in with about 3 days to go,
right,
and goes, here it is. And they go, okay, thanks. And they say, could you make some changes? And I say, I'm sorry, but I'm already on to Gladiator or... But we didn't do this. We said we want to make this as good as possible, and there was stuff that we came up with in the last couple of weeks. The scenes that I think are the most effective sound-wise came very late. You know, when we really thought that we'd given all we could, suddenly you got your second wind, if you like. Okay, how about we start this scene again with a completely different feel, and wow, it works. You know, this was Mum's death, Barbara's death scene was a very late, you know, I was pretty much on my own by this point, just it was more or less an editing process. And the way that came together almost at the last minute, I'm very, very pleased that we made that extra effort, because I find it very effective still.
What's the biggest difference between being a musical artist and then changing gears into a composer, having to have your music actually fit into a puzzle piece?
Well, obviously the discipline of timing is a big difference. Like when we first started making music for release on CD and album, generally it just seemed to be that the average track length in those days was about 6 minutes, which is nowadays I listen to it and I think, oh God, this is going, you know, let's come on, cut to the chase, chaps. It sort of like found that our approach fitted really well, and basically what we did was we shot rushes and edited exactly the way that a filmmaker would. We would do long improvised sessions based on a certain feel, or, you know, like, okay, so this is going to be like really, really different levels of doominess, basically. It's like, well, this is up-tempo doomy, so this could go in the garden scene, but this is like the really, really heavy stuff, which is in the Winchester towards the end. And then there's the big explosive stuff that happens in the big bar fight at the end. And then it was just a question of editing it all down. And I had a copy of Pro Tools, which was the editing software that everybody used at the time. Don't tell any of the film company this, but the version that I had actually came free with a magazine. But initially we were using a free sort of demonstration version of Pro Tools that came with some techie synthesizer mag. But, you know, it worked. And so that's how I learned to edit. And also because I had also been a director of documentaries and stuff, I kind of knew about the process of making sound work to pictures and vice versa sometimes. It sounds like a cliche to say, but it just felt like a really organic process. And the music that we made after Shaun of the Dead was very much more tightly controlled, if you like, and much more heavily edited with lots and lots of sound effects, rather than just these sort of long rambling, get a beat going and you just sort of like let it run for 6 minutes or something like that.
You mentioned before that you tried to steer away from using software and use more analog devices. What inspired that direction?
Age is just age. I bought my first synthesizers when I was at school, aged about 15 and 16, and I wasn't a sports boy. And I spent most of my teens in the cellar of my parents' house with the nerdiest guy in the year above me. I mean, that's how nerdy he was, that he hung out with someone who was the year below, you know, a year younger than him. And we built synthesizers and made sort of sub-craft work, sort of Jean-Michel Jarre type music in the early 80s. And so by the time music became much more software based, you could always hear what bit of software that everybody was using. I mean, even what bit of equipment. There was a famous period where everybody used one particular thing called a Sherman filter bank, and every hit dance record had it. And it was amazing. It sounded fantastic. I would have bought one if I could have afforded it. I didn't. And so you just have to sort of make do with what you've got. And so, yeah, we didn't use any sort of like computer synthesizer software or anything like that, Garage Band or anything sort of fancier than that. We used lots of old gear just to retain that sort of slightly gritty, unpredictable feel, and a feel that's kind of hard to recreate. There's a lot of music in Shaun of the Dead that isn't recognisable as music at all. There's 49 minutes of organised sound, basically. And a lot of it is just like very, very heavy sub-bass drones that are played on a sort of detuned guitar, through loads of effects, and just stuff like that that's just not quite what you'd hear on one of those, library CDs, basically. It's not library music. Mm-hmm. When Edgar wanted to use library music, he could, and he did. We tried to do our own version of it, but he said, no, I think I'll stick with the original. Okay, you win that one.
You said in the past that Pete brought a vast knowledge of horror scores into your recording sessions, and he has said that you were the one who was able to tie all the sounds together. Talk to me about that kind of partnership and how that played out in the studio.
We were very similar, but we had some important differences in our skill set, if you like. He had an almost Edgar Wright level knowledge of Italian horror films and things like that, which I had not been privy to because I was... Well, I'm a sensitive soul, Deke, and I'm not very good at watching horror films. I mean, I'm still genuinely terrified by Paddington 2. I was traumatised by Alice in Wonderland as a child, and so, I still haven't seen The Exorcist or Rosemary's Baby or anything like that. I'm a sensitive soul, and I haven't seen any of these horror films that Pete grew up watching. I mean, he's amazed that he's such a nice, level-headed man as a result. Right.
Were there any particular film scores you guys were using for inspiration?
Well, Edgar steered us in the direction of Ennio Morricone's score for The Thing, and also Suspiria and other soundtracks by the Italian group Goblin.
Yes.
Which, again, I hadn't heard of, but Pete knew all about Dario Argento's films. So he said, oh yeah, this sort of thing. I tried not to be too influenced. I mean, I think the influence of The Thing is fairly obvious in the main sort of bomb, bomb, bomb thing that goes throughout. But I really tried to almost subversively sneak influences in that Edgar wouldn't have been aware of, just so that it didn't feel like a reference fest, basically. It wasn't out of any sort of snobbery or anything like that. I just thought it'd be easier to try and see if I can get away with putting my own stamp on it, of the stuff that I brought to it. Pete was very was very well versed in sort of American funk of the 70s and hip hop and stuff like that. He's very good with beats and stuff like that. So he bought the beats and he bought the blood. And I bought a sense, I don't know what I did actually. I think I just sort of watered it all down so it was acceptable to...
I don't know about that, but you brought it together to work. I don't know about watered it down.
I was listening to a lot of a group called Coil at the time. The later half of the film is very heavily Coil influenced. There's lots of very dark and heavy synthesizer stuff going on in there. But also the idea of that music is just organised sounds. And so there's a lot of just sort of what one pretentiously might call music concrete that's not recognisable as music, which again caused its problems when we were playing it to the film company, because they were sort of... At one point, the music supervisor said, could we have like something, like a tune at some point, perhaps, maybe? Like a tune would be nice. Here's 3 notes. When Sean and Ed bang heads at the end, I mean, bless Edgar and Chris Dickens, the editor, were both so much on our side about the fact that the sound and the pictures were working together almost as one, that they didn't let anybody push us around and say, can we have a singable theme tune?
The score is very beat orientated, and the hero of the movie is a DJ. Was it an intentional connection?
No. It wasn't at all.
It sure works though, because if the story's kind of told from his viewpoint, like that score perfectly matches.
It hadn't really occurred to me that Sean was a DJ. I mean, he was sort of like, they have that session.
He's DJ Smiley Riley in the movie.
The beats are there because it was such a major part of the stuff that we did. Basically, a lot of our music was just beats with noises over the top. And if you repeat a certain noise enough times, then it starts to take on a melodic element to it. I'm only half joking there. Yeah, so, no, I mean, as far as I was concerned, I only really saw Shaun as a sort of slightly underachieving young man working in an electronics shop who liked to play records, at the weekend, which we all do if we've got a shitty job.
I love that when you look at Shaun of the Dead being told from the viewpoint of Shaun, the fact that the score would be done in almost like a DJ type style with beats like that, I was like, man, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
Did you guys ever have writer's block or themes that you guys struggled with more than others?
No, we had ideas pouring out all the time.
Wow.
Which was fantastic. I mean, no, we never had...
That's a good problem to have.
Well, yeah, it's always best to edit down than build up. We were very lucky in that, as far as I remember, we had a pretty good hit rate of suggestions of, basic tracks and said, try this on this scene and see how it goes. And basically that works. And they go, well, okay, we'll finesse it over the next few weeks in the edit. Edgar, knowing so much music, we felt confident that if we did ever get stuck, that he would have a fallback, like he did with the scene that was known as The Plan, where they're going, we kill Phil, go to the Winchester. That Edgar had this piece of music on the temp track, which was, I'm pretty sure, was by Goblin.
Yeah.
And we tried several alternatives to that in a similar style. I could have made them work as far as Edgar was concerned. He had his heart set on this, and fair enough, it's his film.
Yeah.
Likewise, a lot of people were surprised that the opening theme music isn't by us, because it does sound an awful like us. And it's a great tune. I don't know if I could have ever come up with something as catchy as the la 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 thing at the beginning. We always had options, and we were quite quick workers, and also we felt really in tune with the film. Between Pete and I, we really felt comfortable with the genre of horror and comedy and the feel of what we'd done with Spaced. It wasn't a total joy because it was such hard work, but now the body has no memory of pain. I can look back on it with fondness.
The scene when Shaun is on the phone with his mom is one of the funniest scenes in the movie. Your score is used as a comedic punchline when it comes to a screeching halt during that scene. Were you aware Edgar was going to utilize and manipulate your music to such a comedic effect throughout the movie?
That's exactly the sort of thing that we did. I mean, I can't remember whether that was whose idea that was. I'll give the credit to Edgar, but we actually physically did it, because you can actually do that stuff where you can just drop stuff out. One joke that I tried to do that probably doesn't land all that well because it's a bit too subtle. When they're singing White Lines, Don't Do It, there's a drone underneath it going, sort of ominous. And then that drone changes key when they go to the Get Higher Baby. So it's actually sort of soundtracking their version of thing. There's reasons why my comedy career isn't all that successful. That one didn't land, but I know it's there. But no, I mean, doing those dropouts and things like that, I really love the idea of emphasizing things with silence rather than having all the time, because there's enough of that going on, for God's heaven knows there's enough chaotic stuff going on. So sometimes it's just really nice just to go drop the beat, let someone say the gag, and it starts up again. And it's like...
It's such an accentuation to that joke. It just makes that scene so much funnier. It's just to have the music immediately come to a screeching halt, and it goes right back up once you realize it was Philip who got bit. I think it's so funny.
It's like it's
a good one. There's other scenes in there too, like when Shaun is walking to the convenience store and he trips going up the curb. You add in a little record skip in there. I thought that was really cool.
Thank you.
Talk to me about things like that.
There's a little spot effects that we put in, basically. So when he shuts the gate, there's a pew, and isn't that where the kid kicks the football at Shaun's head or something like that? There's a sound effect there. And we did a little backwards, little rewind, speaking technically for a moment. We did a little rewind on that little bit where he trips, and I think there's another one where he slips on the blood as he walks into the convenience store. And that sort of stuff is really, really, really good fun to do, because it's just like putting little bings and bongs and stuff like that in.
It works. It totally works. It's great. I'm a home theater enthusiast, and I got to tell you, just screening Shaun of the Dead last night, man, the highlight of surround effects and like the separation of channels is definitely your score. I mean, your score really hits all over the place. It's fantastic to listen to in any kind of surround sound setup.
That's great.
Oh man, it's a blast.
I'm afraid to say that I'm not a home cinema person.
I got to tell you, if you get into it, your score is fantastic in surround sound.
Do you know, I've never listened to it in 5.1 since we spent a week mixing it in a studio with a guy, and I'm going to give him credit for that because it was a difficult time. He was an interesting character. He just wore a singlet, he wore a wife beater all the time, which is kind of
That's
it. He said, "Oh, can we finish early because I've got a colonic irrigation at 5 o'clock?" And we'd be like, "Okay."
You can't say no to that.
Edgar and Chris Dickens came round to listen to how it was going, and this guy was had a little bit of the old school-itis about him, and Edgar said, "Oh, we felt as though we'd sort of been sent away with a flea in our ear at the end of the session." But I'm really pleased that it sounds good, because Nigel, the sound mixer, he was having to wear 2 pairs of glasses so that he could see the screen. The sessions went on for so long and so late. He goes, "I can't even see the damn..."
Oh, man. So his vision was getting blurry from working so many hours?
Yeah, it's just... Wow. And then the assistant, who was this young kid, he did all the scratching when they're playing It's Not Hip Hop, It's Electro.
Right, yeah.
So that was just like the equivalent of the tape op, like 15, 16-year-old guy who just happened to be able to do the requisite amount of scratching.
Funny. Do you own the vinyl of the soundtrack?
Yes, I do.
I do too. And it's cool because on the sticker, it has the electro sticker, just like the record that Pete, the roommate, throws out the window.
Yeah.
It's so cool. It's such a funny little gag, like just as a purchaser. It's awesome. I love it. What are your memories of attending the premiere and watching Shaun of the Dead fully assembled with an audience?
It was amazing because I'd been to lots of premieres before as part of TV crews. So I'd always been on the other side of the railings going, "Excuse me, MTV." It was in Leicester Square, which is where they have all the premieres. And Chris Dickens, the editor, Tina, the assistant editor, Pete and I, we had a nice drink in the bar in the hotel across. And we walked across and walked through up, and it was amazing because you could feel all the cameras' lights turning off as we walked up. Because they realised, save your batteries, lads. There's nothing to... No. So that was... And then we went in, and there were speeches, and Pete and I sat next to each other, and it was awesome seeing and hearing it. We'd spent half our lives in cinemas, and just seeing this and hearing this, and the reaction was so great. And again, then we went to the party afterwards, and I'd again been to loads of those parties, trying to grab a word with Spike Lee, who doesn't want to be there because he wants to be watching the baseball game or something like that. And I said to Pete, "Right, we belong here. We're part of this, right. And so I'm going to go and fanboy everybody." And the first person I went up to was Bill Nighy, and I said, "Hello, my name's Dan. I did the music." And he goes, "Oh, great, yeah." I said, "I heard you on the radio the other day playing Rolling Stones." He goes, "Oh, yeah." And we talked about Rolling Stones for 5 minutes, and it was like, yes, this is why.
This is why I did 6 months of work on this movie. To talk to Bill Nighy. That's awesome. So the reaction from the audience was fantastic?
Yeah, it was really good. It was a home crowd. I mean, a lot of the people that were there at the time have since gone on to great things. They were sort of like just a couple of steps behind Edgar as far as filmmaking and TV making were going. Mm-hmm. And it was just like a sense of, God, we really pulled this off. And it's actually a proper film that deserves to be shown in cinemas. And it looks great and it sounded really good. And so, it's
definitely something to be proud of for sure.
Yeah.
In our exchanges before the interview, I could tell you were a fan of movies. If you had to narrow down your top 3 scores of all time, could you do that?
Yes. Okay. Top 3, Eraserhead.
Nice. Okay.
I bought the CD of Eraserhead about 15 years before I saw the film. I had listened to it a lot, and when I saw the visuals, I was like, oh my God. Aguirre, The Wrath of God, which is a film by Werner Herzog, who often worked with a German group it's a one-man band, basically, called Popol Vuh. And the opening of Aguirre, The Wrath of God is the most incredible combination of pictures and music I've ever heard. It's one of those movies, like RoboCop or Tremors, that I can watch, if it's too early for bed but too late for freehand. And you go, I'll just watch the first half hour of Aguirre. Gosh. I really like the soundtrack of Tremors, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose I could be cool and say sort of Carter Burwell, who's always really good. Tremors is another of my favourite films. And there's a scene in that where they're doing pole vaulting from rock to rock to rock. And something happens in the music there that just makes me well up every single time. And I've seen it a lot of times. Again,
Wow.
RoboCop, which you were talking about earlier, that's number 4. That's always fantastic. Gosh, I mean, I could go on. Dudley Moore's soundtrack to Bedazzled, the original one from the 60s. And all the John Barry stuff. John Barry, I mean, kind of goes without saying, really. I was privileged enough to spend a few hours with him a couple of years before he died, because I delivered flowers to his house in Long Island. We chatted, and that was really nice. And he gave away a few of his secrets, which I never got to use because it's completely different. But all his stuff. I mean, I grew up with the Bond movies, the 1960s spy movies, and all that sort of thing. I still love that stuff.
So do I. I got a couple of the vinyls of his scores. I love them.
Yeah, the Ipcress File and things like that. The Knack and How to Use It. And stuff like that. It's quite some of the films that aren't so great. And the same with Ennio Morricone. There's some not so great films, but the music is always really amazing. Danger Diabolique is another of my favourite. Morricone did a sort of swinging, groovy 60s rock and roll soundtrack to that, and it's hilarious and fantastic.
Nice. Are you amazed how well Shaun of the Dead has been received and continues to live on as one of the most popular films of the past 20 years?
Yeah, well, I guess I am, because it is a horror film and it does have some of the worst language possible that I wouldn't dream of using, certainly in Canada.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to say, because you can see why 4 Weddings and a Funeral or Notting Hill, or as far as British films go from the last 20 or 30 years, you can see why that's got an enduring appeal. The relationship between Simon and Nick and Sean and Ed is very, very real. There's that thing called chemistry, which no one can fake. And the attention to detail that makes it watchable. There are scenes which have no score on them. I never really bothered to watch when we were working on the film. So I'm like, still, when I watch it. Like, I've just moved house. I'm just setting up a new studio in here. I treated myself to a new TV. Not sound system, admittedly, but a new big telly. And the first thing I watched to sort of like calibrate it, if you like, because I know what it's supposed to look and sound like, was Shaun of the Dead. And I ended up watching the whole damn thing again. And I was like, yay!
Yeah, it's super enjoyable, even if you were involved with it. It's still fun to watch, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of films that I've worked on in various capacities that really you just go, ooh. Ooh. Oh dear. I'm glad I wasn't heavily involved in that. Right. I'm glad I didn't give that one my all. But this one, I really am. I mean, I'm so delighted that this one has lasted so well. It's amazing. It's like a dream come true, really.
Just so you know, in case you haven't been over here, you're not aware of the viewpoint of the States and how they view Shaun of the Dead. It is one of the most perfect movies. You can't find a single person who hasn't heard of it and has anything mean to say about it. So I just want to let you know that, in case you weren't aware of that.
That is so nice.
No, it's
fantastic.
One of the most perfect films over here in the States. We love it over here. I mean, like, to an insane amount. It's crazy, honestly. Edgar Wright's obviously a big, huge hit over here, but definitely Shaun of the Dead. It's one of those movies that everybody can watch. Everyone has a great time enjoying it. I can't thank you enough for chatting to me about your experiences making one of the most enjoyable movies of the past 20 years, Dan. I thank you so much for taking time, sir.
Thank you so much. It really is. I know that if I remind my nephews, or if I come across any of my friends' kids, they say, Dan did the music for Shaun of the Dead. And I go,
right.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's so nice. Well, thank you very much.
Big thanks to all the guests who made this episode so amazing. Paul Edwards, Rosa Martins, and Dan Mudford. Another huge thank you to the show's producer, Gigi Lage, who takes care of all the behind-the-scenes work here on the podcast. If you like what you heard on this episode, trust me when I say we have plenty more coming your way. Make sure to subscribe on all your favorite podcatchers and follow us on our social media platforms like Instagram and Facebook, or check us out on our official website, SideTrack'd.stream. We love the feedback, so let us know if you're enjoying the show by leaving us a review. Thank you for listening. We love you all, and until next time, stay sick.